You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of ICMForum.com. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and today we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. Every year, films that have something so special and powerful that they entrance us, surprise us, stun our senses, kick us in the gut, make us think, and or engulf us in unique sensory experiences, just disappear. There's little to no buzz, few screenings, and in the end, they are swallowed by the sea of endless content. As film lovers, it can almost hurt to see a film we love go without getting attention. You almost feel a sense of personal responsibility in terms of just getting the word out there and promoting it. This is a large part of the reason why we, at the ICM Forum, put together monthly challenges to rediscover unwatched gems and host a yearly pool to put a spotlight on underwatched films. But no effort is as extensive as that of the ICMForum Film Festival. Every year, programmers work tirelessly, go through hundreds of brand new films and select a tight program that runs from mid-November to mid-December. No, there are no screens, but each film must be reasonably available, and the discussion, participation, and sense of discovery has, since it started 5 years ago, been one of the highlights of at least my cinematic year. We talked about the ICMFFF last year as well, and if you want to listen to that episode, you will find a link in the description. At that time, Tom and I were in the jury. This year, we both swallowed a bug and joined the programmer team for the very first time. I don't think I have ever seen this many new films back to back. 173 films were nominated in total, and that's not even looking at all of the films that were under consideration. In the end, we managed to trim this down to a main slate of 10 films, the core event of the festival. In this episode, we will talk through each of these 10 films in detail, in particular our centerpiece, the 20th Century, which did the seemingly impossible, getting full or strong support from each programmer. That just never happens. Of course, our festival also has a select set of smaller slates, each with 4 films in their selection. And while we can't possibly talk through each of them, we will share our highlights and thoughts on the program as a whole, and if we find the time, recommendations. Oh, and if I didn't mention, this is not your usual lineup of hosts. As always, Tom is here, but we're joined by 2 entirely new voices, never to have been on Talking Images before, both ICMFFF programmers. First, I would like to give a warm welcome to Brett. Introduce yourself and just tell us how you got involved with ICMFFF.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. My name is Brett. I'm better known as Fergan Aprito on the forum. This is my 4th festival doing programming, something I quite enjoy. And after the first year the festival was brought over to the forum, I was really intrigued, but I don't typically watch a lot of films compared to some of the other people on the forum, and so I always felt that I didn't have enough time to watch the whole slate of films during the actual festival. And what appealed to me a lot more was being able to take more time, spread that out throughout the year, to watch these films that people were recommending, and then also to put forward my own recommendations. And it's something that I've really enjoyed since starting, and I'm really glad that I've done it, and I hope to continue doing it for many years to come.
Thanks, Brett. Perfect presentation. I'm really happy to have worked with you over the last year as well to just put forth this program.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
We're also joined by Peter, who we could probably call our chair programmer and has led the programming committee now for the second year in the row. Peter, just tell us how you got involved, how you ended up taking over as leading the programmer committee, and just your views on how the ICMForum Film Festival has evolved.
I got involved not the first year it came to the ICM Forum. I was asked then to be a programmer, but I thought it was too complex. There was a lot of rules and processes, and then, of course, I couldn't stay away, so I joined up the next year. Last year, the person who leaded us along all these years, he didn't have the time anymore. And I thought the way it was going, well, the only one who is really going to do it is me. So I did. And then last year, I was also trying to maybe streamline the rules a bit or make it clearer, because it's really not such a complicated process. So I hope I did that. But then I was still not getting the programmers. And then when the festival was finally there last year, there was such a rush of enthusiasm. So that really, for me, that rejuvenated the whole thing. And then this year, my mind was blown by, we started the 1st of January. We couldn't stop ourselves. And then right out of the gates up till now, we just kept watching movies. And usually I'm the one who is have seen the whole festival when we start, so something like that. But now I feel not so much this year. So I'm in awe of everyone, and I'm happy to lead, in air quotes, this process.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I just have to agree. I mean, I was blown away by the enthusiasm this year, and it's so easy to get sucked into it all, because you're getting so many potentially great films. There's so much discussion amongst the programmers, so it just feels like such an organic process, and I'm really happy I signed up. So there's obviously one more participant today who you all know, but who has not said a word yet, and that's my regular co-host Tom. So you really don't have to introduce yourself, but I would like to hear about what it was that made you take the plunge and join the programmer team.
Hi everyone, thanks for the intro, Chris. So I took part in last year's ICMForum Film Festival as a viewer, and I discovered lots of great films, and I was really blown away by the process. I thought it was a great idea, and I wanted to be involved. I go to lots of film festivals. I like to think that I've got a pulse on new releases, specifically when it comes to the horror genre, and I thought I'd had something to add. So I took the plunge and joined in as a programmer, and it's been a great year in terms of film viewings, because I've discovered lots of new films that I probably wouldn't have found out about if it wasn't for the great programming team that I worked with.
Thanks, Tom. And at least for me, like, the prospect of being a programmer has been there for quite some time. I was a member of the jury, I think, every year from the first year onwards. And what really stopped me from signing up or joining the programming team was that I didn't think I had the time or the focus to just contribute that much. But last year, after all of that enthusiasm and just really being sucked up into the atmosphere, because it was so great last year, I just had no reason or excuse not to do it anymore. And I'm just so happy I did, because it was an amazing experience. And I can't wait to do it for 2022 either. I'm definitely in for a long haul now. And with all of the backstory out of the way, let's just dive into the main slate, the 10 films that will probably be seen and talked about the most in this year's edition of the festival. And we can probably just do it alphabetically, or at least almost alphabetically, as we, I think, for the very first time have 2 animated films in the main slate, and it will be interesting to explore them side by side. The contrast is quite big. I also think it will be fitting to save our centerpiece, the 20th century, until the very end, so that we can truly explore and talk about why we loved it as much as we did. Because again, every single programmer either really liked it or just fell completely in love with it. So there's something really special about the 20th century. So, starting from the top in alphabetical order, we have Aniara, which is a Swedish sci-fi film that, I think the way I described it was that it managed to bring this kind of existential Scandinavian sensibilities to space. So, what was your reactions to seeing Aniara?
So I was pleased to see that Aniara was nominated for the festival. I watched this film maybe a year or two ago, and it really struck a chord with me. I think when we did our space exploration episode, I was the only one who had seen it, so I'm glad that it's getting more traction now. And I love how it's kind of like the antithesis of 2001, whereas that's kind of the evolution of mankind seen through a journey into space. This is almost like the devolution of mankind seen through a journey through space that goes awry. And the set design is brilliant. There's lots to unpack, and there's some brilliant visuals, especially towards the latter part of the film. So I'm hoping that this will make a big impression when everyone dives into it during the festival.
Yeah, I have to say, Aniara really was a bit of a sleeper hit for me because, just from what I'd heard about it, from what I'd seen, I figured it would be good, it would be interesting, but I didn't think I would love it. And it just felt so different. There's so many recognizable elements, like you have Doom Voyagers on the spaceship that we've seen time and time again. We have, this kind of consumerism in space. We've seen that from time to time as well, obviously. But there's just this muted existentialism that I mentioned, this mundanity and just this kind of careful niceties and societal expectations, manners. It's almost like a dark observational comedy, if you will, but also so cold. And it has that Scandinavian humor that maybe just because I think I'm the only Scandinavian in the podcast, so I responded quite heavily to that. Especially, this kind of just repetition of work, consumerism, all of these pretenses, as you can get this microcosm of society. And just as you mentioned, Tom, this extreme devolution and this psychological experiment of just how long will society stay together? How will humans respond to this? How much or little can they take? And I think it delivered on all the cylinders. It's clearly a fairly low budget film, but it never feels like it. So yeah, it was a sleeper hit for me, definitely. I just did not expect this to have the power that it ended up having for me.
I haven't seen the film actually, but it's just one that I never got around to seeing because it had enough support already from the other programmers. But looking at it now, it does seem quite interesting, and I'm curious also about the original 1960 version that they made of this film, to see how it compares. So it's definitely one that I'm intending to check out, and I'm hoping that since our jurors voted for it, that there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for this one as well.
And the next film up in alphabetical order is Beanpole, or Dylba, as it was originally called in Russian, by Kantemir Balagov, which is one of my nominees, actually, and I was really lucky with my nominees this year in terms of the main slate. And I managed to present this cold, unnerving, yet tender film that kind of just hits a visual nerve because it follows this tall, slim nurse, a beanpole, if you will, as he struggles through life in post-World War II Soviet Union and cares for her child. And there's this icy underbelly here. It has distancing effects. It has this kind of poetic, like I said, visual beauty over it the entire time, but then it also goes into extremely dark territory. It's thoroughly strong drama from a director I have a lot of hope for. Closeness was already in ICMFFF3 by the same director, and it was quite successful there. So it seems like Balagov could end up becoming one of those festival names. Keep making returns, but incredible visuals, hard-hitting story, great acting. It's a film that, at least to me, really was the full package.
Yeah, I really agree with you there, and I saw it a while back when it was released in cinemas over here, and it reminded me of Russian cinema from the 90s when it was released far more regularly in cinemas over here, and it was the strong strong visuals mostly. And again, here you already mentioned them. And particularly with this one, it's also the colors. You already see it in the poster, but they really impressed me. And I think this is a young director who will be talking a lot about for years to come.
So I saw this film earlier this year, and it was one of the many films from this program that I've seen thanks to Movie, unofficial promotion. But I'm the lone detractor. This film is cold, but it also left me cold. And for some reason, the central relationship between the two women didn't really work for me, and I don't know why. But I did really like the way that the film was shot, and I thought that the cinematography and they were colors and they were bright, but they were also muted at the same time, which is very different from a lot of these World War II era films that you see, especially these bleak, depressing dramas. They tend to be either filmed intentionally in black and white these days, or these sort of gritty browns and grays and yellows. But here you felt like there's some bright reds and some bright greens. Yet it always feels a bit dirty and muted, which I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's sort of the way that my brain visually interpreted it. So I do think it's a good story and it's an interesting film to watch, but unfortunately it did not strike this heart of mine.
Well, that's a perfect description of the visuals, actually. I think I even wrote the same in my review. It really does feel dirty. I didn't catch the same thing. I didn't manage to express it as nicely as you, that it's so colorful, but feels muted at the same time. I think that's really something that elevates the film, because it's really difficult to do, and I can't really think of many films that's managed to have such a beautiful palette of the strong colors but still feel muted. It's really impressive, and even if you don't end up loving the film, or even if the plotting and the storylines, etc., don't win you over it, or if it's too cold, I think most people will end up really appreciating just what this does visually.
Yes, and I think also there's another aspect of the film that sets it apart from other contemporary films set in the era, is that it focuses on the impact the war had, and also the impact that they had on the war of women. And I know that Soviet and Russian cinema has been very good at this over the years, of showcasing the strong female presence in war amongst the fighters, amongst the home front. But it's something that you don't really see nowadays, and especially from other countries. And I think this did a really good job of highlighting that in a way that they're not just passive participants, they're active participants, and they're not just there to take care of the men, they're there to fight as well, and they're there to do the best they can for themselves and their country, while still trying to deal with all the issues that a woman in wartime has to deal with.
That's a great point, Brett, and I hadn't considered it from that angle, because it deals with a lot of harrowing situations that the women have to go through. And obviously we see that the tragic events of World War II weigh heavily on their lives. And I like that you mentioned the colour scheme as well, because I picked up on that as well. It's a bleak and depressing film with a predominantly grimy beige colour scheme, but there are moments of striking bright colours. And I suppose despite the relentless misery, it's shot in a manner that makes the dingy surroundings almost beguiling, because you've got this precise framing and the meticulous long takes. They offer a hypnotic glimpse into a savage and an unkind era in history. And although Beanpole is a grueling experience, it's undoubtedly an accomplished work. But I'm leaning closer to Brett's opinion in that I don't think I'd envisage myself returning to it anytime soon. I appreciated it. I think it is a good film, but there's a lot of darkness and bleakness in there that makes me reluctant to revisit it anytime soon.
Yeah, I think anyone who is put off by cold films with chilling material will have both a hard time watching it and definitely a hard time revisiting it when they know where it goes. And I wish I could say that the next film we're talking about is lighter. I'm not sure I can, but it's certainly funnier in some ways, and it is the Icelandic Echo, or Bergmál, by Runar Runarsson, which, at least to me, is just such an extraordinary work. It combines 56 vignettes of everyday life, some of them just 30 to 40 seconds long, into a 79-minute film. There's no real narrative, if you will. Many of the vignettes are just entirely without plots, some entirely without dialogue, but as the film progresses, it really starts to find a shape, a form, until the point where we realize that we are getting a complete picture of Iceland around Christmas and New Year's. We see people opening presents or having a meal, either with their family or alone. We get political bickering. We get a sermon in a church. We get immigrants being arrested. And no character is ever revisited, but we do follow a clear linear thread as we are really just lulled in by dark humor, bleak minimalism, familiarity, and obfuscation. This was again one of my nominees. I'm so happy it made it. I really didn't think it would. To me, at first, I thought that this would be a fit for the art house slate and not have that kind of universal appeal. But whereas About Endlessness by Roy Andersson, which I nominated and which didn't make it, this one actually managed to convince the people who aren't into art house films that it had something special going for it. And I really think the reason for that is that holistic view and the fact that it paints such a contemporary picture with a lot of thought about just how society is, and did it with both humor, heart, soul, and realism. And it's a wonderful work.
It is a film that when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is an art house film. This will be perfect for the art house slate, just as you mentioned. So I was also quite surprised that the jury decided that this is something they wanted to see. With regards to your Anderson comparison, I've only seen one Anderson film, one of his earlier ones, or one of his trilogy films, I should say. And I find that style of film just to be very artificial. And I know it's intentional, and that's his style. It's just slow and plodding and artificial. And I don't really see the comparisons here, aside from having those vignettes. Because in the Anderson films, those vignettes return and they continue on, and they're kind of interconnected, but maybe not. Whereas here, I don't think any story was told more than once in any of the 56 vignettes. And maybe it's my bias because I'm fascinated by the country of Iceland and I have enjoyed their output cinematically. But I was really drawn into this film, and I really did enjoy seeing those little pieces, little snapshots of what was being displayed. Obviously it's all stage, but there's some more authenticity to it, in that it felt like these are things that could happen to anyone and do happen to everyone. Whereas in the Anderson films, it just so fabricated that it's okay, this is outside the realm of possibility, but it makes for an interesting visual experience. Whereas this one is like, that could be my house on fire on Christmas Day, and it could be devastating to me, or this could be happening to a neighbor of mine. And I found that aspect of the film quite interesting.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there, actually. That is the big difference between Anderson and Runarsson. I think to me, what makes them similar is that they're bleak, dark, existential comedies that focuses in on life, and they do it in vignettes, and the vignettes are one take. But that's really just the form. Like, the content itself and the style of the content is very different. Like you mentioned, everything in Anderson's works is heavily stylized and sanitized and just taken to this completely different world. And here, there really is that realism angle. There really is that sense that this could really be happening. And I think you're completely right. That's probably a large part of the reason why it ended up appealing more to people outside of the art house scene.
I think you hit it on the head too, Chris. It's really a holistic view of the world. It's not bleak in that sense to me. And that's why the form is minimalistic and art house-y. But I think it has universal appeal, and there's that Christmas spirit that's in there. So this is actually, when our festival is gearing up towards the Christmas time, I think it's maybe a film everybody should see from the main slate. It has universal appeal, but not in a way that some commercials use images from everyday life to sell you some banking or a car. I was fearing that the movie would be like that, but when I saw it, that the minimalistic form it chooses, and just all the choices it makes, it's really a good movie that speaks to, I think, everybody.
That's a really great endorsement, Peter, especially the angle that, yes, our festival is actually airing from mid-November to mid-December, so just getting that Christmas vibes in there, it's such a good fit. And I'm glad we actually managed to get the film with that holiday motif, even if it's not, exactly what people expect from a Christmas movie. I'm glad it managed to enter the main slate, even if just for that reason alone. And the next film, alphabetically, it probably doesn't have exactly that, but it certainly has a look, and it's Yinpa by Pema Tseden. And this was one of your nominees, Peter. Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. Well, I always say it's a kind of a film noir, but it's actually not. It doesn't have the cynicism of film noir, but it has the driver alone on the road, and it's a bit of a rugged, silent type. And he goes to a bar somewhere in the movie that he has the coolest bar lady since Raiders of the Lost Ark. In form, it's truly an art house movie, and it's produced by Wong Kar-wai. That, well, you might not really see that in the form, but it's the story it tells is maybe hard to follow, hard to get into, maybe a bit spiritual at times. So in that way, it's an hermetic movie, but just for the images and for the protagonist, the people in it, I think everybody will get something out of this one. It's a really beautiful shot movie. It has a lot of style. Yeah, what more to say?
Yeah, I think the style is what is the first thing that will be striking to people. And I think even though the content doesn't necessarily remind anyone of Wong Kar-wai, it's like getting that kind of look is something he would do. It's a very different director. It's handles very differently, but I have to say, like, this film is deliciously shot. I mean, the use of lighting really makes it seem like the screen is emitting pure heat. And you have this kind of sepia black and white. You have a lot of flash. Our protagonist is someone who essentially never removes his sunglasses. I mean, you have a type of cool, no-nonsense look that would have been perfect for Wong Kar-wai, for Mike Takashi, maybe 20 years ago, perhaps. It has that visual look, but no, it's just not that kind of film. It's actually a slow brooding, lyrical, and as it becomes clearer and clearer, a very philosophical film about choices, connections, and thought. I think it ties into some religious aspects as well. You could say it works a bit of an allegory of how two paths emerge into one as well. So it does a lot. It feels unusual. It's rare but lovely when you... Not that rare, but it's just lovely when you get that kind of merge of really great visuals that also has that kind of cool edge with more slow brooding and philosophical elements. So it's a film that could alienate some people. Again, this is a film I kind of thought would be better in art house, but clearly it had the appeal. And I do think it actually will impress a lot of the audiences coming into it, because it's one of those films that no one's really talked about. It's probably one of the most obscure and underseen films from our entire main slate. So I think this is one of those films that could just really surprise people and grab them.
Yeah, it will be a real discovery for a lot of people. I like what you say about images almost being like light, because I called it a noir, and the characters are rugged, but they are not cynical. And then the images are not really dark, but they are light. But it's almost like an anti-noir, because it has links to the genre, but it's doing things in its own way, in the opposite way.
Yes, that's so true, and it also ties into some Western tropes as well, I thought. So it really just has that genre filmmaking trope and expression in there, but then delivers so much else. But to move to the next film, The Hidden City, or La Ciudad Oculta by Victor Moreno. I mean, that's a film that has no let's put it, no genre cinema elements. It doesn't even have a story. I mean, this is once again a film I would have been sure would only have any kind of hope of making it in the art house slate, because it's like out of the main slate, perhaps even out of everything in the art house selection, this could be described as the most experimental. It's a breathtaking sensory experience created through underground footage, from tunnels to sewers to trains, finding beauty in the most unusual ways and places. And again, there's no plot. there's so much just darkness and magical visuals where you wouldn't think it would be possible to get those kinds of visuals. But yeah, this one just floored me that this actually managed to make it into the main slate.
It's an underground voyage, I think, and it's in a way comparable to the ethnograph lab films that we see in the last couple of years by people just taking the camera on a silent voyage. But this one, it goes underground, it goes to different places. And like you said, sometimes you're wondering, how are they getting these images? What kind of cameras are they using? What kind of exposures? It's really, really wonderful and sometimes alienating. And it's always impressive. And it's just a wonderful journey. And I will only say, just make your room as dark as possible when putting on this movie. It's you really need to dive into it.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I think that's absolutely right. You have to see this movie in the dark. And I really like what you mentioned there about it feeling alien, because this is an example of just going through everyday life. Now, obviously, in so many of the scenes, you get shots of sewers, you get shots of rats, you get shots of, sewage walls or just electronic screens in the train station, etc. And it's not something we're used to seeing, or at least not used to seeing in that way. Like, it makes a sewage wall look like the night sky filled with beautiful stars. And in terms of the alien element, just the way it focuses in on, I think, like a terrain map, for instance. There's just so many elements there that it really reuses material from the real world and makes it look different and unique, and makes it people look at it in a different way than usually would. And that's exciting, and it's thrilling, and it's new, and it really adds a kind of tension you wouldn't expect this type of film to have. And I think we can also say that the next film alphabetically on the slate, There Is No Evil by Mohammed Rasalouf, also makes us think about things in a slightly different way, because this is probably one of the bravest denunciations of the Iranian regime that has been made in Iran. And it takes the topic of this large social discussion and it just merges it with mundanity, familiarity, and just the intimacy of everyday life to the extent that when things actually tie in with this darker reality, it shocks us and it stuns us. It's a way of talking about life and death issues and policy and extreme forms of punishment in a very different way, where, just as the title says, there really is no evil. There's just a society that makes people do things that makes us very uneasy and do things that may stay with them and scar them for the rest of their lives. So I think this is probably one of the hardest hitting films of the main slate, but it's also one of the films that I personally love the most. So what was your reactions to There Is No Evil?
There Is No Evil. It's a beautiful film, which I think has made me realise the similarities between all the films on the main slate. They're all shot beautifully, really striking films. This one in particular, though, it follows 4 powerful stories that are linked thematically. They each look at different parts of the society and how a certain punishment affects those whose lives it enters. And I could have quite happily watched a feature-length film on each of the 4 short stories. They are all hugely engrossing, and the performances capture the raw emotional turmoil of those whose lives are thrown into disarray by the tragic events that we witness. I'm really glad that this one made the main slate, because I think a lot of people are going to find it a very deep and thought-provoking but also rewarding experience.
I can add that it will be released in Dutch cinemas on the 2nd of December, so that's perfect for our festival. Dutch viewers can go to the cinema to watch it there.
Yeah, I think this is a film that, I think all of the films on this slate would really do with a cinema viewing, but I think this is a bit of an epic, really. It's hard-hitting, but it's slow, and I think that the first act, for instance, it really lulls your senses. You're wondering what the evil is. And I'm not going to spoil anything about what happens, but at least for me, it came out of nowhere. And it might make the audience gasp even. So I think that seeing this one with an audience might be especially strong.
I also think it's worth mentioning that if slow cinema isn't your cup of tea, don't be put off by this. I'm not a huge fan of slow cinema, but I was absolutely hooked on this. It's got a really captivating, engaging story. It's beautifully shot, so take a punt on this and guarantee you'll be glad that you watched it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think for a little while you might be unsure of what exactly the film is building up to, but once you get it and you get that that's what the film will focus on, I think you'll be glued to your seat. And let's just, without spoiling any of the other stories as well, they get even more tense, if you can put it like that, either in terms of just actual suspense or just in terms of direct tension between the characters. And obviously, most films have some kind of central tension, something to be fought over. And the next film alphabetically is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection by Lemoine Jeremiah Mosese. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because he really is striking out as, once again, a really visually exciting director. I think, like you said, Tom, I think every single film on the main slate is shot stunningly, and it's definitely one of the things that bring them all together. But this is a director who really knows how to use visuals in a really great set of ways. It ranges from the stunning compositions of nature and flowers to more trippy, almost experimental footage. It's a mishmash of sensory experiences, but don't worry, this is not an experimental film. It is actually a very clear narrative of an older woman whose village is about to be flooded, whose citizens are essentially being paid off to leave, and she does not want to move. And it's about just this team, which is just something that's happening all over Lesotho, apparently, which pits, this essentially small town with old-fashioned customs against, city bureaucracy, and this kind of which pushes modernity that leaves certain people in complete disbelief, bewilderment and sorrow. I think it does so much emotionally, so much visually, but also so much with the story that this is one film that fires big on every cylinder. You get just an incredible sensory experience, blending so many different types of visuals. You get a really strong, moving narrative. You get social commentary, and you get an incredible central performance. It really has it all, and it's undoubtedly one of my favorite films from the main slate.
I think that this film is going to take the award for the film with the best title in the festival. I absolutely love it. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. It's such an intriguing and poetic title, and it conjures up all sorts of ideas about what the film might involve. As you said, Chris, it's a brilliant story about a clash between traditions and modernisation, and it's a familiar story, but it's told in a refreshing way. And there's such a striking use of colour, and it's a real bold and beautiful vision, and there's undoubtedly a bright future for the director. From the very opening scenes of the film, I was hooked. I was utterly mesmerised by the evocative narrator, to the extent that I kind of wish that the film had spent more time with him. And the music and depiction of a culture that I was unfamiliar with was also fascinating. So I'm glad that Chris nominated this one and brought it to our attention, and I'm pretty sure going to have a great reception in the festival.
Yeah, it's certainly a colorful film, and it also helps that Lesotho is just a beautiful country. With the clothes of the people is always very striking to me. They look sometimes like Peruvian or Bolivian people with these colorful, thick mountain poncho-like things they have on. And well, it's certainly a director with a lot of promise in the future. And when I was celebrating its 75 years of existence this year, he was one of the people invited to make a special installation artwork for them, along with Lucrecia Martel and Carlos Recadas and Iya Sanque. So he was already up there with the big names in the art house scene, and I heard him talk for about an hour also about how he's trying to find his voice, his African voice. He's mostly self-taught, and then he went to Berlin and learned the trade there. And of course, African filmmakers pick up the trade by watching a lot of Western movies. So he was really looking for, well, he depicted a lot of things out from his youth. His grandma is in the movie in all kinds of ways. And just the stories of the country. It's not an easy movie to say what it's about because it's about so many things. But I think it's one of the many African movies that we see now coming up with a very modern, youthful voice. And that's really putting forward a global cinema, not just a post-colonial cinema or something that it's really of the country itself, but it's really speaking to the world, and they are part of this growing global world we're living in, and you see that also reflected in the festival, because when last year we couldn't find one African movie for the African slate, we now have a separate African slate, and I think that really is showcasing what African cinema is doing at the moment, and I think Mosese is leading the pack.
I think I will be the lone detractor on this case. I'll play spoilsport again. I really wanted to enjoy this film. It was something that I forget who, either Chris or Petter, had been talking about quite regularly in the discussion. And so I was looking forward to it, and I was glad that I finally got a chance to see it. And I do agree that visually this is stunning, absolutely stunning. Not just the way that they shot the characters and the colorful clothing, but just the landscape itself. And I'm a sucker for beautiful landscape films. And this has, beautiful mountains and valleys and mist, and it's absolutely gorgeous, 100%. But I just couldn't really get into the story as much as I was hoping to. And then, without saying anything too spoilery, the way that the film wrapped up just didn't really work for me, and that kind of took away from the whole experience. Because up until that point, I'd been like, it's okay, it's good, but that ending just didn't really work for me. However, I think it still is quite a formidable film, and I'm still perfectly happy that it did make the main slate, and I'm excited that people are excited to see a movie from Lesotho, because it's not a country that's on many people's radars cinematically. It's also probably a country half people haven't even heard of before, not knowing where it is or that it is even a country. And I think that's one of the great benefits of this film festival, is that it does allow us to highlight cinema from forgotten places or unlikely places. And it's not like, we're helping push along this little film from Lesotho, give it a chance. But no, this is a formidable film that looks great. It feels like it could have been produced anywhere else in the world. And it's exciting that cinema is starting to reach this level internationally, where it's not just a handful of countries that make the best films in the world and everything else is just getting the scraps. It's that you're seeing quality filmmaking coming from all corners of the world. And we're truly reaching a spot where you don't know where the next great film is going to come from. And I think that's a really exciting element that this film is an example of.
I think that might just be one of the most beautiful detractions I have ever heard. So thank you for that, Brett. And yes, like I said, for me, this is one of my favorite films of this decade, honestly. And I think I do have hopes that other people will feel the same way. And like Tom mentioned, the title too, it has so much in it. Like, it could be taken literally, as the film really deals with grieving. The main character, Mantua, has just lost her son, and it does capture that stunningly. But it's also the idea of the village being either relocated or the people potentially fighting back, and it just has this, it could mean so much. And the commentary and the examination of just the social nature of the people here, it could also be taken in so many different ways, of just how we see progression versus tradition, just how we see the characters And I think regardless of our views on all of this, I do think they meet us with their emotions. So I hope that people going into this film will be blown away. Not everyone will, that's always the case. But I do think that, like Brett said, anyone who loves beautifully looking cinema will at least find something to love here. And talking about beauty, beauty can also sometimes be very ugly and even grotesque. And that's how I felt watching he or she, however you want to read the title. It's S ahead of he, by Shengwei Cao. It's a Chinese stop motion film about shoes, and that might make some people raise their eyebrows a little bit. But I have to tell you, this is some of the one of the most unnerving animated films that I have ever seen. I almost get Jan Svankmajer vibes here, just in how it works with the material to make it so uneasy, to almost make us squirm as, we get this experience of metal, leather and cloth and just everyday items that can seem so off-putting and so disturbing. There's this kind of elusive power within perhaps all of stop motion, really, to render everyday objects sinister. And here we're just entering this kind of nightmarish splendor of it all, as the film actually starts to look at rigid gender conformity and oppression with male leather shoes in charge, and anything feminine must be killed or perhaps replaced with paint and metal. And the few women's shoes are allowed to exist are kept imprisoned, locked away within layers of clothes. They're essentially their only use being reproduction. This is such an ugly film. There's no dialogue, but it's also just such a visually euphoric, stunning creation. I don't think I've seen anything quite like it. And I don't even know how to, if there's a market quite for this, because it's so unusual. But if once again, I think this is a case where someone managed to find a film that I had not heard of. I would never have seen if not for this festival, but became an instant favorite. And I think this is once again one of those films in the main slate that just will shock and surprise people. So I'm just so happy that it's there.
So he or she, not sure, I'll let you say, Chris, how we're running with that, but it's easily the best animated feature I've seen whilst working through the nominations. And it's really encouraging that stop motion animation hasn't become obsolete over the years, that it's still going strong, even if it's in the guise of these obscure passion projects. But it's a bold and beautiful Chinese stop motion animation that will surely resonate, as Chris said, with fans of Shvankmajer and the Key brothers. It could easily be enjoyed at face value for this kind of absurd Lynchian nightmare world it depicts. There was some really grotesque and unusual visuals. For instance, there's a scene where there's creatures which are made up just of brains with legs, and they fart cigarettes. Like, what on earth is that all about? But it was brilliant. And it offers thoughtful commentary on gender, overthrowing the system, and Chinese factory shop workers, which is not bad for an animated film with no dialogue whatsoever. As Chris said, there were times when it could be a little difficult to follow. I wasn't sure if some of the scenes were depicted in such a way due to symbolism that may have gone over my head, or were just stylistic choices that looked good. But that is only a minor gripe, and I was hoping that this would be a solid contender for the animation slate, and I'm really pleasantly surprised that it's made it to the main slate, because it offers a unique view, and I think it's very strikingly different from the rest of the films on the main slate, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think you're completely right that there's so many direct comparisons to sweatshops in China through various forms of culture in China. Probably things that's definitely going over my head here as well. But what I also really like about it is that it doesn't make like easy points about gender roles. It really just takes us down this kind of utterly nightmarish trip, which, you know, even the characters, if you will, we're meant to root for, turn out in very different ways than we might have thought. And it's like this cycle of more and more grotesque and unnerving visuals. And you're absolutely right, Tom. This is like a Lynchian trip in so many ways. And it's one of those films I'm sure I'll probably see again. I would love to see it. I would love to see again. I'm sure many other people will be attracted to it again because you keep thinking, what else did I miss? What else is here? And this is another film that really hasn't gotten much exposure outside of this festival. It's another wonderful, extremely unseen find. So I hope that, you know, our users will start to spread the word, that we can get more write-ups on it. I'm sure discussion on this film will be quite extensive. So since there's really not been much, commentary from critics, etc., on this film yet, I really hope we can fill in just some of that void, because there's just so much to talk about here. And of course, She is not the only animated films on the main slate this time around. There's also a Japanese entry, Promare, or Promare, however you want to pronounce this title. And this is probably one of the clearest examples of what some people are now referring to maximalism. It's so over the top. And I think it's, at least for me, this was not one of those sleeper hits for me. I had not expected really loving this, because it seemed like it was going to be this kind of more conventional anime action film. But then it just took all of the conventions to extremes, and it just embraced its cliches and went all in. And to top it all off, it has this semi-trippy animated style that makes it feel like it had a full life on its own. It's once again, like every single film in the slate, visually beautiful, but it's also action-packed. It's fast. It's so fast. And I think that if, you know, some of these films might have been a little bit slow, I think this and also here, to be honest, it's also quite fast in a different way, brings the kind of antidote to that within the main slate too. So it's a really balanced slate, just with no real theme beyond just looking stunning.
Well, our festival is really trying its best to highlight underseen things, because animation, as you said, it's going under the radar. I haven't seen SE yet, and I hadn't heard about it before it came to our attention through the programmers. And Promare, I had seen it. It played in the cinema over here. It's luckily that the story is a bit conventional, actually, because it goes so fast, and then the style is turned all the way up to 11. It's really over the top, and you can still follow it because the story beats, you have seen them before. If you haven't watched any anime, maybe you've seen some fantasy movies that follows those kind of story beats. Yeah, it's just a hell of a ride.
I would totally agree there. It's a really fun and exciting experience. The visuals are really striking. The music is bombastic and over the top, but it works brilliantly with the film. And it feels like there's a lot to the story. In some hands, you might imagine that this would have been stretched out to make an anime series, but they managed to pack it all into a film. But it doesn't feel crowded, and there's a lot of great action sequences, but they all feel slightly different to each other. So it's great how there's these different visual themes that appear throughout the movie at different points. And as the other guys have said, it's just a lot of fun and some really impressive animation in there too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description of it. It could have been a TV show, but it's just so compressed and fast. And you're absolutely right too, Peter, that the fact that the plot in so many ways is conventional, that is a strength here, because yes, you wouldn't have been able to follow it otherwise unless you just sat glued there with almost with a notebook. So let's be very happy it did not go for a far more trippy or deep type of contemplative plotting where we would have all been very, very lost. And that is actually almost the entire main slate. There's just one film left, The 20th Century by Matthew Rankin. And full disclosure, this is, in my opinion, the best film of the festival. I didn't even nominate it. It was Peter, and it became my favorite film of 2019. Just like a few months after we recorded the episode for Talking Immersion, and I was beating myself up that I had not seen this earlier. Just as with each of the other films, visually breathtaking, possibly one of the most visually breathtaking here, but it's also thoroughly bizarre, certifiably campy, and just a mad mismatch of old school cinematic styles from the 30s and 40s and 50s that just creates a netherworld looking back at one of Canada's ex-prime ministers, essentially depicting the rise of William Lyon Mackenzie King to power. But in this world, Canada is a poor, essentially gaslighted and willing prisoner of a seemingly fascistic Britain, represented by the Lord Protector motto, flying the flag of the old disappointment, and Canadian citizens having the literal motto, do more than expected and accept less than deserved. I mean, this is just a mad trip. Visual styles all over the place. Campiness turned up to 1,000. It's hilarious. It's awkward. And I think we will have to mention Guy Maddin a few times here as well, because it's hard not to make some comparisons. But just as with Runar Runarsson and Roy Andersson, even though some of the form might be similar, this Neverworld, this surreal, eerie pastiche, the way they do it is completely different. Rankin is actually presenting a picture of Canada. He's playing with history, and he's playing with patriotism, and he's introducing all of these hilarious elements from ridiculous trials. He's playing around with gender roles. He's doing so much that the comparison also seems a little bit insulting, because this is a filmmaker. It's his debut, by the way, and it really is a filmmaker with a brand new vision, a unique style. I can't wait to see where he's going in the future. But yeah, this is just absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for nominating it, Peter.
My pleasure. It was also a huge surprise for me, and what was also a surprise that actually all of us loved it. It was, well, as you say, the movie celebrates cinema in many forms, so it shouldn't be that surprising. But it's not a movie I would think that would be for everybody. There's the story that is about Canada politics on the one hand that not a lot of people outside of Canada will know about, but I don't think it's really all about that. And there's the gendered things, there's some horror and some camp and some gross things in there that will be not for everybody, and yet we all, with all our different tastes, we all loved it.
For me, I was aware of this film when it first came out because it was up for a bunch of national awards. I am Canadian, by the way, so yeah. So I was quite surprised when I heard other people starting to promote this film, because oftentimes these smaller Canadian films don't get distribution. And it came out, 2 years ago, but I only got a chance to see it partway through this year just because it wasn't really available. And I think the comparisons to Madden are very apt. I do find a lot of Madden-esque elements to Rankin's film. But yeah, this one blew me away. I had been meaning to watch it. I just kept putting it off and putting it off. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this, much to my own surprise. And it was just completely bonkers. And I don't normally go for completely bonkers films, but this one, for whatever reason, had all the right elements to make me enjoy it. And I was, one reason why I was surprised that other people were enjoying it, because it does have a lot of Canadian specific references, especially to the political history of the country from around the turn of the 19th century or turn of the 20th century. So I was very pleased to see that even if you don't have this context, you're still able to enjoy the film. And I think that really speaks to the vision that Matthew Rankin had of creating such a film that would be accessible to everyone, regardless of how much they understood of the basis of the story. And additionally, with the gender blind casting, which may seem like a stunt, but I feel with this type of film, it just worked completely. And after you notice, like, oh, that's a woman playing a man. But then after you've noticed it, it doesn't really factor into anything else beyond that. It's like, no, this character is male and it's presented as male, and it just makes sense. And it just seemed to work. And I think also reimagining some historical figures in a queer context or in a campy context might put off a couple of people. But for me, I thought it was hilarious. And I know that the real William Lloyd McKinnon was not like that. And the real, I think it was Borden was the other one, wasn't like that. And there were two prime ministers who had a lot of conflict between each other in later years. So it's interesting to reimagine them and what they went through when they were younger. And it had a lot of great sayings. My new favorite saying is, as certain as a winter's day in springtime, which as a Canadian makes perfect sense because it may be April 15th, but it's going to have a snowstorm the next day kind of thing. Like, you know, something crazy is going to happen weather-wise in the middle of the spring. And it hit all the things that I like about film on the head, and it just made me absolutely adore it. And not only am I greatly surprised that the rest of the programmers greatly enjoyed this film, but I'm also pleasantly surprised that the jurors voted. Actually, no, we didn't let them vote. We just said, no, you're going to watch this film whether you like.
Exactly, we loved it so much that we just pushed it through.
It's great to hear the Canadian frame of reference there, Brett. And it's brilliant to see that, you know, all of us programmers got behind this film. I can certainly see why Chris absolutely adores it as well, because, like you've already said, it has the feel of a Guy Maddin film, though it also brings an ample helping of comedy, which is used to wonderful effect throughout. The quirky set designs ooze charm, and the vibrant performances from the cast ensure that a film which delves into the world of politics is far from stuffy. And there's a real sense of theatrical performances from the cast that kind of hark back to the exaggerated performances often seen in silent cinema. And as Brett said, it's just a completely bonkers film, but in the best way possible. There's so much imagination on show. And I feel like I've already said this about a couple of films in the main slate, but maybe again, it's a film unlike anything else on the slate. That's only a good thing, surely. So I hope everyone else enjoys this as much as we have.
I love that, you know, it comes up over and over again that this is a unique film on the main slate, or this film is unique, or this film is just completely underseen. This really seems to be the theme this year. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm so proud of the slate you managed to put together, because you have like Aniara, which is, you know, a cult effort essentially. You have these animated films going in completely different directions. You have slow films, you have fast films, you have experimental films, you have literally everything under the sun almost. And with this film, I think, yes, like we all said, like there must be something in the water in Canada that makes directors be able to do this kind of film and do it without seeming to mock anything. Because yes, what's a big part of Guy Maddin's thing is that he takes cinema from the 10s and 20s and 30s, just mixes them together and uses the same kind of campy acting, but without mocking this style. He just uses it for comedy. And this is exactly the same thing Rankin does, but I think it just kind of takes references slightly later, where he kind of starts in the early 30s, but adds in the 40s, 50s, and maybe even like 60s TV elements in there as well almost. And he's still that earnest performance that, you know, that if you ever watch, you know, terrible 30s propaganda films, for instance, like Reefer Madness, it has that kind of earnesty in over-the-topness in the performance. There's just something with that makes it instantly hilarious, instantly enjoyable, especially when taken into something this insane in terms of style, where you have like outside scenes that feels almost like neon, like the German expressionism, just how minimalistic the sets are. But then you get inside of buildings and it's overtly campy, and it's just visually all over the place almost, but that's what kind of ties it all together, and the earnestness in it all, and the lightness and the amount of comedy and just these ridiculous trials. And I just love that, by the way. I know I'm babbling out of love for this film, but just the fact that, that one of the trials in becoming prime minister is literally how passive aggressive you can be. I mean, it's just so amazing. It's utterly hilarious from beginning to end. It looks great doing it, and it's just, like Brett said, it's one of those films that just fires up all my buttons. It hits every single soft spot I have, and I'm just so happy I discovered this film.
I must say the passive-aggressive part is fairly accurate as well for the Canadian experience. Just as an aside, though, what you're saying, there is a large chunk of Canadian cinema that's just weird. And I don't know why this is, but two small anecdotes. There is a good book, and I think it was even turned to a film afterwards, on Canadian cinema from the 90s. And its title is Weird Sex and Snowshoes, which is just sort of this recurring theme of items in Canadian cinema. And then also a few years ago on the forum, someone did a comparison of which lists were most similar to other lists. And of the official Canadian list, the one that was the poll from TIFF, the list that shared the most number of films was with the 366 Weird Lists cinema, which was unexpected. But it makes sense. There are just so many weird films coming out of the country beyond the, Cronenbergs and Maddens, which we all know and expect the films are going to be weird, but even other smaller films like Kissed, where, a woman's having sex with corpses because that's what she does. Like, it's just these little things that, for some reason or not, Canadians excel at creating these weird films that the rest of the world just gobbles up. And I think Rankin is the latest example of that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I definitely need to sit down and watch even more of these weird Canadian films, because I'm sure there's a lot more in store for me. I mean, this film barely has any imprint so far internationally. I really hope the word comes out. COVID might not have helped slowing down the festival circuit for it, perhaps. But yeah, it's an incredible film. I'm so happy we picked it as a centerpiece. And that's literally the entire main slate summarized. And we really went a little bit longer than we expected to go on this as well. So unfortunately, we have to spend even less time on the other slates we have. And there's just so many wonderful slates. Like mentioned, we have an African slate standing on its own for the first time. We also have a Latin American slate, an Asian slate, and a European slate. We have an indie slate, an art house slate, and a cult slate, which is called Just Before Dawn. We have our animation slate, an LGBTQ plus slate. Oh, and we have a documentary slate. And I think we have a really good, balanced mix of interest points for anyone coming into the festival and want to explore further. So while we can't discuss all of these films in any kind of great detail, I would be interested in knowing just which of these slates are you most proud of or would be most excited to jump into if you weren't a programmer.
I'm genuinely and generally pleased with all the slates that we've come up with. I think we've managed to put together some really interesting slates that, even if they're grouped by theme, they don't feel like it's four films of the same thing. They feel different and differentiated in each slate. For example, the animation slate has four very different styles of animation and very different films from around the world, and I think that's really a strength of it. And I'm looking forward to, mostly myself, I've seen everything on the LGBT slate, so I'm looking forward to that. And Story Angel, a French film there, was the only other film aside from 20th Century that was seen by all programmers. So it's a notable distinction there. And the other one that I'm interested in most is probably the Euro slate. Typically, this slate's always dominated by French films, and there's not a single French film in the Euro slate this year. So it's a different take of what we had. And I think the Latin American slate is also something that interests me. And like you mentioned, this is the first time we've had an African slate solely on its own. And I think that's a huge step up from last year, where I think the only African film we had was in the main slate. So the fact that we have an African film in the main slate plus four high quality African films from around the continent this year really goes to show that not only is African cinema supposed to be taken seriously and should have been taken seriously decades ago, but that audiences are starting to warm up to it better and its distribution is getting easier. It's easier for them to make films. And I'm really excited to see how our jurors will respond to the African slate if they give it a go, and just how many interesting stories are to be told from that continent.
I think those who listen to Talking Images regularly will know which slate I'm the most proud of, which is obviously the Just Before Dawn slate, because that's where a lot of my horror nominations slot in. We've got Why Don't You Just Die, which is a brilliant black comedy from Russia. We've found room for an inventive Argentinian thriller, which takes place entirely in a single location, which is called 4x4. That's another brilliant one. We also have another bonkers film from Canada in the form of Anything for Jackson, which is potentially the creepiest horror film on the slate, and a brilliant psychological horror called Rent-A-Pal. So I'm really excited to see what the reception will be on the Just Before Dawn slate. I'm also very interested to dive into the African slate to watch the remaining films in there that I haven't seen. I really enjoyed Air Conditioner and Jesus Shows You the Way to the Highway. And as Brett said, we've got such a diverse slate from representing so many different countries, so many different styles of filmmakers. And I'm really proud of what we've put together here. We've watched an incredible amount of films to bring you this program. So you can be assured that, we've put our heart into this and made sure that we've presented the best possible films for you. So I hope that everyone enjoys it. And I hope that if you're not a regular visitor to the ICM Forum, that you'll come along and join in with the festival, because we're a friendly bunch and we'd love to hear from anyone who wants to take part.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and also mention the African slate. I already mentioned it before. It's really nice to have it and really special. I think I really see a surge of activity in African cinema. It's already happening for a while now, but I think it's getting more and more. There's a lot of things happening there, but also we have a really, really good team this year of programmers, and it's really reflected in the diversity of the slates. Indeed, no French movies in the European slate. We have a very diverse animation slate. We have even the indie slate. It's always difficult for us to get good programmers to delve into that, and I think it really worked out. And if I have to single out something I want to highlight and I'm really proud of, then it's the art house slate. That's really my style. I think most of the nominations are either made by me or have gotten into there because of recommendations by me. And I mostly want to highlight the Galician cinema. There's two movies nominated by Chris after I put them on the path to the Galician cinema. There's a new wave happening there for a few years now. It's really experimental cinema, a lot of mood, a lot of landscape, and Galicia has a beautiful green landscape. It sits in the northern part of Spain, but it's a rugged, wild terrain, and there's really the Celtic culture is also coming through, and that's we wanted to highlight that. So we have two movies from that region in that program, and next to that we have an essay movie from a European director working in Brazil. And that's really, again, a journey through the night almost, and it's Obscuro Barocco. I think the title says it all, and leaves it poetically obscure. And then we have a movie from India that it's perfect fit for the art house slate. It's not really something most people will expect from India. It's experimental cinema. It's by a filmmaker who delves with a lot of religious themes, but he does it in an obscure kind of way, so it's not always coming through. And I'm really, really curious to see the reactions to this.
Yeah, I think for me as well, the two slates I'm most particularly proud of is Africa and Art House. I think for Africa in particular, the fact that we managed to get 4 such different films. I mean, we have Jesus Shows The Way to the Highway, which is one of Tom's nominees, which is just this utterly bonkers take on essentially Matrix-like themes, but with old school graphics. It's like the Matrix if it was set up with the technology in the 2000s or even the late 90s. It looks so, again, campy, but it's a lot of fun. It's high energy, it's playful, it really works into its limitations. It's just such a wild ride. And then you have something so small and heartfelt like Supamudo, about a girl with a terminal illness and her dreams of being a superhero, where essentially an entire village comes together to kind of try to make her feel like a superhero. It's lovely and strong. Then you have something like Air Conditioner, which both I and Sol, who is not in this episode, but is one of our regular co-hosts, both put high on our lists for 2020, which is just this almost meditative, kind of low-budget, semi-culty look at class relations in Angola, but in a really funny way, and again in a really visually stunning way too. It's really interesting, which is the dark comedy. And then you have something like Youth, which is more of a clear-cut drama about women within a conservative society. And I just think it's 4 completely different countries. It's 4 completely different styles. And it's just great to see them manage to get that kind of selection for Africa. It's just absolutely lovely. I hope we can do as good a job next year. And yeah, like Peter mentioned with Art House, we chose to put a specific focus on Galician cinema with Endless Night, which honestly is my second favorite of all of the films we nominated. It's one of the films that most people didn't like, or rather, it's one of the films that split people down the middle, with those more inclined to art house loving it, and those who didn't, falling completely off. And it's just another film that's really just a journey into night and looking into Franco-era fascism, with all of these semi-vignettes, but following one character, and it's once again beautiful. You also have Fire Will Come from Galicia, stunning and meditative, and these films and the other films from Galicia that didn't get the support to really get featured. I think there's something really special happening there, to the point that almost like an episode of its own, just exploring what's going on there. And just to also shout out Obscure Barocco, that's a sensually experience, like a completely, thoroughly visceral sensory experience through night. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And just to shout out to all the other slates, they're really well balanced. The slates we have set up for Asia, Latin America, and Europe are all from different countries. They're all in different styles. It really feels like we managed to make each slate live and breathe, and I'm just so proud of the work we managed to put in to make that possible. And I really hope that anyone listening to this in real time in November or early December 2021 will take the trip to icmforum.com. We will have an entire set of threads set up, one thread for each slate, where people will be discussing these films. And just based on the atmosphere last year, I can't wait to see just people unpack and talk about and share their love for these films. And I'm really sorry we couldn't dive into the other slates deeper. All of them deserve more focus. All of these films deserve to be shouted out. For instance, there's Pity in the Euro slate, which was another one that just really floored the programmers. Every film in every slate has something special about them. Every film in all of these slates have a lot of programmers putting strong support behind them and pointing out that these are films that people really should be seeing. Obviously, you can pick and match. There's no requirement to see every film from any of the slates. In each slate, we will present the films with a short description. We will help you find them in terms of purchasing them in online shops, on online streaming services, etc., so that you are able to see all of these films, because one of the requirements to be part of it is that they are actually accessible. So do go to icmforum.com, join the conversation, watch these films. You will not regret it. This is just an incredible selection. The festival kicks off on the 15th of November and won't end until the 13th of December. And of course, it will happen again next year and the year after, and just continue. The threads stay up as well. So if these films excite you, just come on over and join in on the fun. Thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of ICMForum.com.